the British royal family into a place considered a symbol of perfection, ceremony, and supreme power. But behind that luxurious velvet curtain, there are hidden secrets, forbidden love affairs, and scandals that shook the world. From passionate kings to princesses tied between fame and love, each story is a dramatic chapter in royal history. In today's video, let's explore the most shocking love scandals that have ever rocked the United Kingdom. The story begins with Henry VIII, the famous Tudor king, who shocked Europe not by his victories on the battlefield, but by a decision for love that changed the course of English history. Upon his accession to the throne, Henry married Catherine of Aragon, his brother's widow, in a political arrangement between the two monarchs. At first it was a peaceful marriage, but as the years passed, Catherine could not bear a son, which for a king of that era was a disaster. Henry came to believe that this marriage was cursed by God, because the Bible forbade a man to marry his brother's wife. When Catherine was middle-aged, Henry met Anne Boleyn, a young woman intelligent, charming, and different from all the other women in the court. Unlike the others, Anne refused to be a mistress. She wanted to be married officially, and that challenged both the throne and the Pope. Henry fell madly in love with Anne. He sent her love letters, calling her "my heart." He promised to do everything to win her, but to marry Anne, he had to annul his marriage to Catherine. When the Holy See in Rome firmly refused, Henry chose the unthinkable, separating England from the power of the Pope, establishing the Church of England, with himself as the head. It was not just a divorce, but a religious revolution. England left the sphere of influence of Rome, ushering in the English Reformation. Thousands of monasteries were dissolved. Wealth and land fell into the hands of the king. Henry was free to marry Anne Boleyn, but the price was that all of Europe considered him a heretic. Then the dream of love quickly turned to tragedy. Anne gave Henry a daughter, Elizabeth, but not the male heir he desired. When Anne miscarried again, the king's indifference turned to rage. His enemies at court seized the opportunity to fabricate charges of treason and adultery against him. Back to her. In May 1536, Anne Boleyn was beheaded at the Tower of London, just 3 years after she was crowned queen. When the cold blade fell, Henry VIII, who had divided the kingdom to marry her, was not present. But Anne did not disappear from history. Her daughter, Elizabeth I, would later become one of the greatest queens of all time, the one who ushered England into its golden age. From an ambitious love story, Henry VIII initiated a reform that shook Europe, reshaping religion, politics, and English identity. And more than half a millennium later, that scandal is still recounted, as a reminder that sometimes just one infatuated heart can change the world. By the turn of the 19th century, as England entered the luxuriant and conflict-filled Regency period, royal scandals were once again in the public eye. George IV, a king known for his hedonistic lifestyle and haughty temperament, had a scandalous marriage to Caroline of Brunswick. The two hated each other almost from the day of their wedding, living apart for years. But when George ascended the throne, Caroline was still the legitimate queen. Unable to accept this, the king sought to remove Caroline from the throne, but instead of a common law divorce, he pushed the matter to the British Parliament, with a special bill called the Bill of Pains and Penalties. In essence, it was a public trial of the Queen, accused of adultery with an Italian servant while living abroad. The whole of England watched with bated breath. Witnesses were questioned in Parliament. The press published every testimony, every scandalous detail, making the private life of the royal family into a major London play. But what George did not expect was that the public sided with Caroline. Public opinion saw her as a victim of the king's power and cowardice. As anger rose in the streets, Parliament was forced to withdraw the bill, and the Queen's trial ended in royal humiliation. The event was not only a failed divorce, but also marked the first time in British history that the private life of the royal family had become a matter of national politics, ushering in a period when people no longer just obeyed the monarchy, but began to scrutinize, judge, and discuss it. In 1936, Britain witnessed an unprecedented shock in modern history. Less than a year after ascending the throne, King Edward VIII announced his abdication. not for politics or war, but for love. The woman who shocked the empire was Wallis Simpson, a charming American who had been divorced twice. In the eyes of the conservative public at the time, she was the embodiment of taboo. A divorcee could not become Queen of England because it went against the teachings of the Church of England, of which the king himself was the head. But Edward defied all. He declared frankly, "I cannot shoulder the heavy burden of the king without the woman I love by my side." It was a declaration of a heart, but also a fracture of an empire. The Commonwealth was in turmoil, the government was divided, and finally, in December 1936, Edward the Faithful signed his abdication, becoming the only monarch in British history to abandon the throne for love. He was made Duke of Windsor and, together with Wallis Simpson, lived in exile for the rest of his life, far from the royal family but still a symbol of a love that dared to challenge the throne. At the turn of the 20th century, the British royal family was once again thrust into the spotlight, but this time, in an era of tabloids, tape recorders, and sensational headlines. The relationship between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles, an old friend, a love that lasted for years, gradually became an uncontrollable media storm. When Charles married Princess Diana, the image of the royal family seemed perfect. But behind the smiles in front of the cameras, there were gaps that could not be filled. Then one day, private recordings emerged. Intimate conversations leaked out. The press jumped on them like moths to a flame. A series of tabloid headlines, suggestive interviews, and Diana's sad face on television shocked the world. For the first time, people saw the royal family not as a perfect symbol on the wall of power, but as a family in disarray, with very real love, mistakes, and hurts. The leaks not only complicated the public image of the royal family, but also laid the foundation for the biggest media crisis of the 1990s. It was a time when the British people began to realize that behind the throne were ordinary people who could love, could make mistakes, and sometimes live their lives under the world's judgmental gaze. In 1995, the world held its breath when Princess Diana, once known as Britain's Bride, appeared on BBC's Panorama program. In front of reporter Martin Bashir, Diana broke her silence for the first time, speaking frankly about her marriage, betrayal, and the suffocating pressure in Buckingham Palace. With a calm but hurt voice, she admitted, "There were 3 people in this marriage." That sentence rang out like a thunderbolt across the British sky, leaving tens of millions of viewers speechless. No member of the royal family had ever dared to speak so honestly on television about loneliness, about the fragility between love and royal duty. But many years later, when public opinion had calmed down, another truth gradually emerged. Diana's family and the media began to ask, how could Martin Bashir convince her to participate in that historic interview? In 2021, an independent inquiry led by Lord Dyson concluded that Bashir had used deception, including forged documents, to gain Diana's trust. The BBC formally apologized to the royal family and admitted that the interview should never have taken place that way. The organization also announced that the program would never be rebroadcast, out of respect for the princess's memory. The event not only rekindled the pain of trust and manipulation, but also opened up a wide-ranging debate about journalistic ethics, privacy, and the limits of media in an age when the public is so hungry for truth that it sometimes forgets its price. The story of the Panorama interview, then, is not just the final chapter in Diana's tragedy. It is also a haunting mirror of the complex relationship between power, the media, and the real person behind the crown. As the 21st century approached, just when the British royal family seemed to have learned from previous scandals, a new shadow loomed over the palace. This time, the focus was on Prince Andrew, the second son of Queen Elizabeth II, and his controversial association with Jeffrey Epstein, an American financier who was later convicted of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. As Epstein's name made headlines around the world, photos and testimony showing Andrew meeting and hanging out with him caused a public outcry. Some victims in the Epstein case named the prince, accusing him of inappropriate behavior. Andrew denied all of it, insisting he was innocent and had never done anything wrong. However, his 2019 BBC interview, in which he tried to explain the relationship, backfired. Instead of erasing doubts, it fueled public outrage. Pressure from the media and society grew so high that in 2019 and 2022, Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement with one of the plaintiffs, avoiding a public trial. He has since stepped back from most official royal duties, and the title Prince has largely been dropped from public life. The case is not only a major blow to the royal family's image, but also shows that, in an age of transparency and global media, no one, even the wearer of a crown, can be above the judgment of justice and public opinion. Over the past half-century, the British royal family has weathered many storms. From the tragedy of Princess Diana, the phone leaks that rocked Britain, to the scandal of Prince Andrew in modern times. Each story, though different, reflects an undeniable truth. Behind the aura of royalty, they are just human, with desires, mistakes, and hurts. Times change. The media exposes every dark corner, and the public no longer sees the royal family as a perfect symbol, but as a family struggling to maintain dignity in the storm of the century. And perhaps that is what makes them continue to attract attention, not because of their power, but because of the very real fragility of the people living in the palace.